We're usually 10 minutes late to everything. Thank you all for gathering here today and the opportunity to get together. This is our 12th town hall of 15, because we're doing town halls in all 15 counties of New York 21. We just came from Lowville, and before that we were in Hamilton County, up in Indian Lake, and so we did 3 today. And made some time to stop at a nice retirees luncheon to speak with some folks there. But the way we've been doing these things is we spend about an hour together. I'll talk a little bit about myself, why I'm running, open it up to any questions you'd like to ask, any issues you want to raise. We'll preserve about 10 minutes or so at the very end, that in the event you don't want to ask a question or raise an issue in front of everybody else, come, we can chat in person, and we can do it that way. One of the things that I'll provide sort of some context for right at the very beginning is that I am not currently yet a sitting member of Congress. And so as we talk about things here today, I won't be able to point to you to particular pieces of legislation that I've been working on or produced in order to address your needs or whatever it may be. If you raise something, I'll do my best to offer my perspective on it, what my positions and views are. And there may be some instances where I don't have an answer, and I'll acknowledge that, and then I'll go work to find an answer to the question or issue that you'd like to raise. But let me first start off by introducing myself and describing a little bit about my background and why I'm running. I'm Matt Castelli. I'm running for Congress. If you retain nothing else from our discussion here today, those are the two most important pieces. I was born and raised down in the Hudson Valley, so a little bit further south than the eastern portion of the district. And I grew up in a bipartisan household. Dad is the Democrat, Mom's the Republican. And maybe it's no surprise that I turned out to be an independent for much of my life. But went to Siena College, not too far away from the eastern portion of the district. And 21 years ago when I was in college, 9/11 happened. That became a driving force for my career, as it was for many of my generation. Went and joined the CIA, served there for about 15 years doing counterterrorism work, led teams hunting down some of the world's most dangerous terrorists. I worked in the same department that found Osama bin Laden, served Afghanistan and Iraq, and had enough success doing all of that kind of work that I was tapped by the Obama White House to come down and serve as the director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council. A role I was asked by the Trump administration to stay on it, and I did for the first year of the Trump White House. Because if I learned anything throughout my career in public service, it's that when it comes to protecting our nation, our communities, my family, yours, it requires us to put country before party. And my belief in that has never wavered. Now, while I was at the White House, I was still a CIA officer. You're an apolitical servant in those roles. I went back to CIA, and for the last 2 years of my career, I worked with some cutting-edge technology startups, got a business degree out of Northwestern, and then COVID hit. And now, my grandpa was an Army doctor at West Point. Got out of the Army, remained a physician, and he raised a family of nurses. Almost everyone in my family is a nurse, with the exception of my mother. She served in a different capacity. She became a teacher. But my grandfather instilled within each of us the sense of duty, the duty to care for others. And so when COVID hit, we got to a point pretty quickly in the pandemic where we were having 9/11 every single day in this country in terms of deaths, 3,000 people a day. This was the most compelling challenge of our time. So I left government and I joined a healthcare organization here in New York, started by veterans, to better coordinate care for veterans, rural communities, by connecting health and social care together. Focus on our human and social service providers. That's where health and well-being really happens. So I was building out coordinated care networks throughout the Northeast. I really loved what I was doing. And then January 6th happened. You might imagine a former counterterrorism guy spent a career trying to prevent things like that from happening in foreign capitals. So to see it happen in our own didn't sit well with me. But what really didn't sit well with me was the involvement, and certainly on that day in the aftermath, from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. I think she sold out our democracy and our country that day. I think she betrayed her oath to the Constitution, the same oath that I took when I joined the CIA many years ago. And it's really disheartening to see her continue to defend the insurrectionists, the violent insurrectionists, those who were involved in the events of that day, because I think that was one of the worst attacks against law enforcement in our nation's history, certainly an attack against our democracy. But as I've been talking with some folks, and probably have the opportunity to chat about this here today, that's not an isolated event in terms of Congresswoman Stefanik selling out our country and our community. She certainly sold out our community in order to advance her own career. Over the course of the last 8 years, she's risen higher and higher in the ranks at the expense of what it is that we need from a representative in Washington. She certainly sold out key constituencies, and that's a real challenge for all of us. We need to have a representative who's representing our future and investing in our future, not their own. And what I've heard as we've been traveling around this very big district, I put about 55,000 miles to date on the truck. We've been having town halls, as we mentioned, in every single county to talk to folks. I'll tell you about some of the things that we're focused on in this campaign that is derived from the things that I've heard. We're going to be fighting for reducing costs for working families and seniors and making sure we have a strong economy that works for everyone. We're going to fight to defend our freedoms, most certainly a woman's right to control her own body and make her own healthcare decisions, but also our Second Amendment freedoms. And then we're going to fight to make sure we've got safety and security for everyone. And that's going to be about funding our law enforcement, securing our border, but also defending our democracy. And looking at the other areas in which people really derive security. Access to healthcare, having economic and job security by investing in economic growth. Those are the things that we're prioritizing in this campaign because we want a representative, I think, that's a bit of a moderate, which is certainly what I am and what I think we need a restoration to, a voice for the great middle majority to bring us together to actually start solving some problems rather than creating more of them. But with that, I'd love to pause and open up the floor for you all to raise any issue or question or concern you may have.
Matt, could I ask you, could you talk at all about Raybrook Prison?
Absolutely.
Because I know there's issues up there. And what they said to me was they have gotten more support and more attention on the issue from him than they have Stefanik, who is not met them.
Yeah. So Raybrook is the only federal corrections site in New York 21. We have a couple of state-run prisons, but we only have one federal prison at the Raybrook Federal Corrections Institute. And I was approached by some of the leadership there of the union president, who complained that over the course of many, many months, they had reached out to Congresswoman Stefanik because they've got some serious concerns there. Certainly with workplace safety, also with challenges with pay. The workplace safety issues also tie into the fact that they're undermanned for the really important job they have of maintaining the safety and security of a number of inmates there. And so the ratio is way off. They're facing some serious issues and concerns. They haven't had the kind of pay that they need in order to retain folks. And so classic traditional sort of challenges from a labor perspective. Fair pay and wages, workplace safety issues, and these are issues within the federal government because they're federal employees. And so they're members of the local AFGE union there. And they had elevated and tried to reach out to Congresswoman Stefanik to address their concerns. They got no response from Stefanik. Some staffers had offered some responses, but when they were trying to get her there to tour their facility to actually address their issues and concerns, she was nowhere to be found. And so they reached out to me, and we sat down for well over an hour to chat about what the issues were. And as a former federal employee, I identified some of those issues. And I could certainly sympathize with some of the things that they were facing. They've gone on to try to build a little bit more awareness to the safety and security issues that they're having there with some promotional banners that they've got in their community to determine whether people in the community feel safe, knowing that at this federal prison, they have some challenges in terms of their actual workplace safety, that they are undermanned for maintaining the prison population that they have there. But when they raised these issues in the aftermath to Congresswoman Stefanik and outlined how she had failed to respond to their needs, Congresswoman Stefanik went on the attack against them and called into question their credibility. And that's really, I think, a real disservice, not just to these members of our law enforcement community, but really disgraceful in terms of how she approached this issue. This is the only issue in terms of actual responsiveness to our corrections community that she actually could do something about. She actually sits on a caucus in Washington in Congress to actually address federal prison reform and opportunities to be had there. And for her to go silent when they asked for her help, she shows up anytime there's a press event or an opportunity to use our law enforcement community as a prop. But here, when she actually had a problem that she could solve, that she could elevate their voices to the highest levels of the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice, she failed to do so. And in response to being called out on that, she attacked these members of our law enforcement community. And so I think it's really disgraceful for how she talks out of one side of her mouth about backing the blue, but in reality, she's been stabbing them in the back time and time again, certainly in the events of January 6th, but here in our own community, she's done that. And I've been in great contact with Daryl, who's the president of their local chapter of AFGE, the president of their union, to see what we can do. Limitations for me as just a candidate running for Congress but certainly when we win, we'll have an opportunity to elevate their concerns. And one of the things that I've spoken out about, like, listen, true to form, country before party, I'm always gonna be willing to call out members of my own party. I'm running as a Democrat. If Joe Biden, President Biden, claims to be the most pro-union president, this is a union issue. This is a labor issue. And he has the opportunity, their administration, to address this issue of unfair and non-competitive wages and unsafe workplace conditions, and it needs to be addressed at the highest levels of the Bureau of Prisons. And that's something that I would certainly have the opportunity as a member of Congress to call out and draw some attention to make sure we're resolving those issues.
If I could just mention, when he talks about shortage, everybody thinks you're short in your workplace, right? They used to have 120 corrections officers. They have 70. Oh, you're a nurse? No, today you're a CO. Oh, you're a clerk? No, today you're a CO. There's no power for 14 hours? You know, when people talk about what a coincidence it was that there was no camera outside Epstein's cell, ask how many actually worked in that prison, because there is like zero maintenance budget for any of that. And that's happening here in the North Country. She's on the caucus that's supposed to have been implementing the GAO findings since 2021. And she has the nerve to say, we met with you. No, a scheduler met with them and never got back to them. Hi, come on in, make yourselves at home. There's drinks over here and some cookies.
I agree. What we doing? Good.
Feel free to grab a spot. Hi, I'm Matt Castelli. Greg, nice to see you.
Peter Wentz.
Hi, nice to see you.
Kind of on that same point, Matt, I mentioned to you early on, there was the layoffs at the air brake. I know it's not in the 21st district now, but
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of right around the same time the prison closures happened, and she was right in front of the cameras there with, you know, bashing Governor Hochul for closing the prisons, which none of those people lost their jobs.
Right.
But yet, 125-ish good union jobs from the air brake got sent to Mexico,
Right.
and there was crickets, nothing about
Yeah.
that.
This is what we need, I think, in terms of an actual problem solver that's gonna be focused on maybe the, not attention grabbing and headline grabbing issues, but doing the hard work and trying to bring people together to actually solve the challenges facing various constituencies, communities, businesses, whatever it may be. Seeking attention via headlines is not a way to actually address the problems in our communities. And I think that the headlines may be helpful to advancing someone's career, but it comes back to what I was saying at the onset, the challenge where we all feel we've been sold out. It's all about boosting her profile and having the headline, having the snapshot, and using people as props, but not actually producing any real results. That's not my expectation of any elected official. My expectation for somebody that's gonna represent us is actually gonna address the needs that they raise within our community.
Do you have any ideas on how to build up industry and the economy in this area?
Yeah.
I mean, you just said you came from Indian Lake. About what'd you see up there, other than beautiful foliage?
Right, I mean, couldn't.
You know, Indian Lake to Blue Mountain Lake to Tupper Lake, Long Lake, Tupper Lake, and on down. Industry has kind of like, Tupper Lake's got, what is it, Sun Mountain and the Wild. Blue Mountain's got the Adirondack experience. Other than those, there's, you know, and it comes right on down through Star Lake, Cranberry Lake, Governor, Philly, right on down.
Yeah. We were just talking about this in the last session in terms of, I don't know if you saw the news within the last week or so, down in Clay, they're gonna be producing 50,000 jobs with a major investment in a chip manufacturing plant down there. Down in Poughkeepsie, there's a major investment happening with IBM that's gonna produce thousands of jobs. And so we're talking billions of dollars that are being invested in upstate New York, but not in New York 21.
Right.
My diagnosis of that challenge is that we could be bringing those jobs here if we had a federal representative who, one, could work nicely with others, which we don't, and then two, was actually interested in clamoring for and working hard to make the kinds of investments that are necessary in the economies and jobs of the future, certainly creating the conditions by which we can lay the foundation for economic growth. I'm gonna get to that in a second. Because right now, the byproduct of both of those initiatives that we just highlighted that are bringing jobs to upstate New York, but not to New York 21, came from the CHIPS bill that was recently passed into law, notwithstanding Congresswoman Stefanik's vote against it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this issue is actually a real important one for the challenges that we're all facing with rising costs. Certainly, as a result of the pandemic. Any phone, vehicle, most of the new goods that are being produced across the globe, but certainly here in the United States, require little semiconductors and microchips. And the vast majority of them are being made in Asia, some in China. More and more of them are being made there. And when the pandemic struck and all of these supply chains broke down, we stopped being able to produce those things. We stopped being able to deliver those things. That's why brand new cars were sitting on lots, because they couldn't get the chip in there to make them viable and to drive them off. Now, increased prices. When the supplies break down but the demand is high, prices go up. And so that's what's causing the inflation that we're all seeing. So this CHIPS bill was an opportunity to make investments in domestic manufacturing, particularly of semiconductors. It's an opportunity to actually address inflation on many of these goods. It's an opportunity to make sure that our supply chains start and end here in the United States. It's an opportunity to create good paying jobs. It's an opportunity to create competition with China and boost American competitiveness. Stefanik voted against it. Unconscionable, don't understand why, other than to just be a part of the opposition and boost her career. But that's bringing good paying jobs to upstate New York, but not to New York 21. Many of those areas may have had the foundation of creating the kinds of services and infrastructure that would create a space for a major employer to come into. And that's where we need some more time and attention. A lot of economic development you see at the local level, at least my diagnosis, comes around creating some sort of tax incentive for an employer to show up, right? Local economic development at the county level, state level, creates a space in which you can entice someone to establish a plant. But the moment the economics don't work for that employer, they pull chalk and they leave a community devastated, because there's a lack of resiliency there. We need to invest in resiliency. We need to invest in education, and healthcare, and mental health resources, human and social services. All of the different things that create a community that can thrive, we need to be focusing on. Because when we do that, people will want to be here. They already want to be here because of the beautiful environment that we have, as I was driving through peak foliage all throughout the day. They already want to be here for that. How do we create the kind of social and human infrastructure that create a space where people can thrive? How do we create the kind of investment in the hard infrastructure, like roads and bridges that aren't crumbling, that we can actually transport goods and services and people? How do we create the kind of technical infrastructure, like broadband, that we need for all of these things to create a space for? And so those are the kinds of investments that we need in New York 21. And for the last 8 years, none of that's been happening. And we need to change that now, to create the foundation by which we can attract some of those employers here, to start building those good manufacturing union jobs, the opportunities for us to really grow our economy. And that's coming from those investments and the resiliency that comes along with them.
I'm so glad that you're a moderate. I am a retired teacher of little kids, and I'm the grandmother of little kids. And it disturbs me in this country, the division, the name calling of adults, and it's affecting our young people. The North Country, I'm never going to move. I'm sorry. We don't have a tiki bar by the shore, and we don't have a Nordstrom, but we have good people. The lady over there talked about somebody mowing her lawn when she couldn't.
Yeah, my husband had surgery,
Yes.
and he was laid up for months. And the neighbor, who a lot of people don't like because of his business positions, cut my grass in the wintertime, plowed my driveway, came up and checked, do you need anything? And I appreciated that.
If I needed a kidney and couldn't pay for it, we'd be having a spaghetti dinner right in this hall. The thing is, we need somebody who's a problem solver and somebody who will unite us.
Yeah.
Because being up here, we have no power. All we have is our voices. We're not big contributors. And if somebody could unite us to do practical problem solving, I'm sorry, but all our government does is raises money for an election, gets elected, and then goes to Congress or the state and fights, and nothing gets done. And because we are a poor area, we need to consolidate our numbers. And we need somebody like you to, work for us. I hope, it's not about money, it's not about anything, but I think people here know it's about heart.
Yeah.
And human lives, kids, and doing what's right.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Can I ask, that individual, that gentleman who provided some assistance, did he ask you what political party you belonged to beforehand?
Nobody knows now, cause you're, is at the end of my driveway. His is not yours.
Well,
They're true Trumpers,
Secrets
on
out.
my road, because it's a town road. On one end, and in the middle, they're flying black American flags. So that tells, I'm in Trump area, I'm surrounded.
well, has he stopped being nice to you?
No.
Well, that was the point I was gonna make.
The
is that-
neighborly,
and that he didn't-
neighborly,
We don't ask people what political party they belong to before we have a spaghetti dinner for them and we mow their lawn. That's what you're talking about in terms
Yes.
of the kind of people that we are and the example that we can set about what's required to actually solve some problems. I'll offer some support, and I believe he was genuine about this, whether he was genuine about addressing it. Former President of the United States, Donald Trump, when he was running for president, he called out a problem in Washington, D.C. These self-interested politicians who only care about their next reelection,
Clean swamp.
who are beholden to their corporate donors and just padding their wallets in the next cycle and the next cycle and the next cycle. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik is the quintessential example of the swamp. She's someone that is really only interested in advancing her own career at the expense of the rest of us and being beholden to those corporate donors. She sold us out. We need, I think, to restore a degree of trust in government, a government that works of, by, and for the people. And we need to restore that for all of us, because I don't think we're actually addressing many of the complex challenges that we're facing in our nation. It becomes a question of one team versus the other, and it's turned into this sport and entertainment value. We certainly see our cable news networks that create this space and echo chambers where it's attacking one side versus the other. That's on social media as well. And there's this for-profit engine that is focused on keeping us divided and keeping us distracted from actually doing the problems that are addressing the problems that are facing all of us. Certainly politicians are to blame, I think, for that as well. It's incumbent upon us, however, I think, to break that down. Because if we're only voting for someone because of how great a Democrat they are in opposing the Republicans, or how great a Republican they are in attacking the Democrats, that's just gonna leave us continuing this fight with one side versus the other. It's professional wrestling. So long as we're fighting with one another, we're never gonna be in a position to fight for one another. And we need to start electing people based upon their record of results or their actual ability to start delivering real results for the community that they were elected to represent.
And
I
to
think-
negotiate too.
Absolutely.
We're gonna need a lot of negotiation.
Negotiation, compromise, those should not be dirty words, because how we run our businesses or our households, we oftentimes come to these things with different perspectives, right? I venture to say that within your own houses, people don't always see eye to eye. I think there are some married couples here. That probably is true, not to.
My wife's still registered as a Republican, despite the fact that I've been harping on her for years.
She's in good company. My mother's registered Republican. That's fine as well. We don't run our businesses with different people who are providing input on our teams with it's just my way or the highway. We identify a problem and we bring people to bear to help solve it. Our government should work that way too. And I think the best way to do that is by elevating moderate voices. Right now, my diagnosis of one of the problems in addition to the swamp is that the loudest voices are on the extremes. It's the far left and the far right. And some people think the solution to the far left is the far right. Some people think the solution to the far right is the far left. It's the middle. It's the great, what I believe is called the great middle or great moderate majority. Most of us find ourselves somewhere in this great middle. You're either center right, center left, smack dab in the center. We don't have a voice anymore because those loudest voices are on the extremes. And one of the things we're trying to do in this race is to elevate the voice of this great middle or moderate majority. We went so far as to create a separate line on the ballot called the Moderate Party. I'm not just running as a Democrat, I'm running as the Moderate Party candidate. I'll have 2 lines on the ballot. And this is a space what we think we can build a coalition, not just of Democrats, but independents and Republicans as well, who many feel a sense of political homelessness. They don't feel well represented by the ultra MAGAs. or the squad. Well, how can we create a space for all of us to come back together? And that's one of the things that we're doing with this moderate party, because it's not just about winning elections. That's how you can govern more effectively, from the middle, from coming together. And this is where I have some concerns with even the National Democratic Party, because they've, I think, tried to reduce the moderate Republican voices that are out there in order to help win elections, to boost a Democratic majority. And I think that that's a problem and a challenge. There's a couple of examples throughout this election cycle where they've helped to defeat a moderate Republican to elevate an extreme Republican that they think the Democrat can more easily beat. I think that that's dangerous, because we need those moderate Republican voices in Congress as well, because those moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats can actually more effectively work together rather than it being one side versus the other. And so those are some of the things we hope to restore in this election and in Washington, is to help elevate the voices of those moderates to bring us together.
You got all the big problems, but what about the little ones, like the daycares and things for the kids to do? There's nothing for kids.
Yeah.
Nothing. Nobody pays any attention to a kid, you know, except for now the abortion, whether to abort or not to abort.
Yeah.
But after they're here, what are you gonna do with them?
Right.
Nothing.
And it's not just a challenge for the kids, it's a challenge for their parents.
Right.
One of the things that I've heard throughout my travels, and a lot of the challenges that folks are facing, is the lack of affordable, accessible childcare options.
Right. That's why women can't go to work.
Correct. And so we talk about workforce shortages and why employers don't have access to more personnel, more talent. Well, some parents are staying at home because they can't afford to work. They can't afford to find childcare. Those are the kinds of common sense, I think, investments in our communities that can be helpful. And it's not just people, parents talking about this. I hear it from businesses. I hear it from chambers of commerce. These are the common challenges. Two top of the line issues: childcare and housing. Affordable childcare, affordable housing, the
Yep.
lack thereof.
There's none.
The market is not producing these solutions. There's a role, I think, for government to help come in and provide some assistance. And I think that there's an opportunity where you make those kinds of investments in childcare and affordable housing. I view those, you know, there may be some on the Democratic side that think we should just be doing them because it's the good thing to do. That may be true, but I actually think that that's a pro-economic growth policy. Because that parent that I can now invest in our community to provide some access to affordable childcare gets into the workforce, helps that business grow. The good or service that they're providing, that right now the cost is going up because of inflation, now goes down. That benefits the rest of us. That's a pro-economic policy that I think we could put forward and help actually solve the problem. But you're right, that we're not, and I wouldn't discount this as being a small issue. This is a big issue, particularly in our community. We don't have the kinds of daycare and childcare facilities we need that are affordable and accessible to folks.
Right, and like there's that great big old building, that warehouse that sits up there that nobody can do anything with, that you could have somebody come in and build apartments
Yeah.
for low-income people.
Right.
But can't do anything with it.
Yeah. The North Country Public Radio did a good series of things around affordable housing and the challenges we face throughout much of the North Country on this problem.
Yeah,
And it's not just about the lack of housing and its affordability, it's also acknowledging that we don't necessarily have a shortage of structures. There just may be blight or dilapidated structures that need some effort in either rehabilitating or tearing down and rebuilding a structure,
that's
whatever
what
it
I'm
may be.
saying, yeah.
And there are opportunities to be had in many of our communities to actually create middle income, because it's not just about low income housing, it's actually about middle income housing. It's about the opportunity to create a space for people, you know, when they're first starting off, maybe just a family, to have a place of their own.
right.
Yeah.
One of the things with the housing in this area is, once the military went to privatized housing, the rate went up for the housing, and all of the landlords in the area raised their rent
Yep.
to match
Yep.
the military scale for housing.
They're
It's
expe-
not affordable for civilians in the area. I mean, an E4 is paying over $1,200 a month for housing, or having it taken out of their pay on post.
Right.
So, in the community, that's where it's starting.
Right, but young kids graduate or get
Can't
out-
afford that.
They can't even get out of their parents' house.
Right.
They can't. And that's a big problem, because once you're an adult child and you're still living with your parent, it ain't fun for anybody.
Right. I'm sure both sides of that equation.
Either party.
You had your hand raised.
Yeah, so you were talking about building onto a resiliency, and you were also talking about, I'm sorry, about investing into like the community.
Mhm.
And we talked about it briefly about, housing, but over the past 3 years, people who are, very low income, there were fires, so we had Rainbow Hotel that did burn down. We also have a spot that is right by the circle, you know, where, if you go from our town, you can either turn left, go towards Ogdensburg, or go straight into Emmons Mills. So around that spot, there's like a facility where people who are homeless live. That place doesn't even have water, half of it is burnt down, and it's so far back where we don't even realize it. Watertown did consider about building, warming shelters, which I think we are gonna be doing that soon. Also, I think like mini houses, and there's still a huge pushback from the community. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what do you envision and, you know, diagnose to really give people, you know, housing first? That way they can actually have the foundation to really work on mental health and job security.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think when you hit the nail on the head in terms of some issues around, it's not just about affordable housing, it's about quality affordable housing. Because there are some places that are dangerous to live in, that are not quality. And I think we talk about this maybe in a couple of different things, because some of the housing issues we're talking about, you know, young kid coming out of college, or folks who are, you know, leaving the military, need to find a space for their growing family, whatever it is. And that may be different from people who are truly homeless and need to find, and some of those, many of those are veterans, right? And how do we actually facilitate those basic needs that provide a degree of actual security for human beings? It is a key challenge, and one that actually, when you make these investments, you see a tremendous benefit from folks who would otherwise maybe have challenges in terms of substance abuse, that may have challenges in terms of crime. These are all challenges that, if you don't provide the basic necessities first, you may risk increasing. So the investments we make actually have profound effects around public safety, as well as economic growth. There's been a tremendous amount of work that's been done across the country about addressing homelessness by actually just providing housing and providing a safe place for somebody to get on their feet and actually start getting back on the right path for their life, getting a job, whatever it may be. It actually helps save our healthcare industry and government taxpayer dollars a tremendous amount. Because some of those folks may be showing up for shelter at an emergency department, and they probably don't have health insurance. And that costs the taxpayer a tremendous amount of money if they're showing up 10 times out of the year. Actually, if we just invested those resources in their housing, we could actually solve that challenge or that problem. And so I think these are the kinds of spaces that we need to actually be having real conversations around solving the problem, certainly for homelessness. If we talk about it too, I think we address the phenomenon, certainly in a community like ours here, where we talk about veterans issues. We all agree, all right, you know, we should be providing housing and mental health resources and substance abuse resources, whatever it may be, whatever our veterans need in terms of human and social services, they deserve because they served our nation. Well, in my view, the best way to provide those kinds of resources is to provide them in the communities where they live. Because if we're requiring some folks to travel to a VA center or to engage with somebody, it becomes that much more of a burden or a hurdle. So if we want to make those investments, we want to take care of the people that took care of us and served us, let's make them in the communities in which we live. But we should, I think, not to speak for you, I think you sort of highlighted a little bit of a stigma that we may have in our local communities about actually addressing this phenomenon. And it's incumbent upon elected officials to help push through that stigma, because that's where we can create a space for everyone to thrive, and that should be the goal.
Matt, can you say a word about Tulsi Gabbard? Tulsi came out this weekend, who was a former vice chairman of the National Democratic Party, and actually made some pretty strong statements that you have kind of said similar, but I'm not sure, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with a friend of mine today who talked about Tulsi Gabbard with Joe Rogan in particular, and how excited he was that Tulsi Gabbard, some of the things that she said, especially around Ukraine.
Yeah.
Let me let you respond.
Sure, so for folks who aren't aware, Tulsi Gabbard was a former member of Congress, I think out of Hawaii, who at one point, I think, ran for president, and was, was running in the primary during the last election cycle, maybe even the one before that. And this week, I think she made some news by formally leaving the Democratic Party. Listen, I'll offer some thoughts. I'm not sure if Tulsi Gabbard has her sort of head on straight. I think I've heard and seen some things that represent some disinformation and influence from the Russians. She's been sitting on, sometimes she gets in and takes the seat for Tucker Carlson on his show, and has been promoting some things, I think vis-a-vis Ukraine, that really seem anathema to what American values and American sort of policy positions are on that issue. Not to diminish everyone's right to their own opinion, but she's been way out of step, I think, with the mainstream. I'm not even sure she's like in step with mainstream Republicans. She's a little bit further out there. And for her to make some sort of claim that she's leaving the party because there's no space for moderates, she may have a point there. She may have a point in that the loudest voices in the room that we've been talking about are on the far left or the far right, and we need to elevate the voice for moderates. But I know plenty of moderates, certainly in Congress right now, that are Democrats, who are making their voice heard. There's someone that I've had the benefit of having an endorsement from, Representative Abigail Spanberger out of Virginia, former CIA officer, very moderate Democrat. She's somebody that even very recently called out Nancy Pelosi for some things that she was hoping to push forward a bill that I firmly believe in and support to prevent members of Congress or their family members from holding or trading stock. They shouldn't be using their office to enrich themselves. And instead of allowing that bill to move forward, Nancy Pelosi unfortunately sort of quashed it. And Abigail Spanberger called her out for doing it. I think she did so right. She was correct in doing so. And so I think that there is a space for us to actually restore moderate values with both political parties. I'm not quite sure I'd go as far as saying that Tulsi Gabbard was a moderate Democrat.
On VA, in the area, this area, we have a VA clinic that every couple of years changes contractors and changes location. So if you don't want to deal with that, then you go to Syracuse and go to the VA hospital down there. But one of the issues in this area is the VA, in order to get the community care, you've got to get an appointment, which takes a while. Then you've got to have consult with them. Then they got to send it for approval. And then after you get approval, you got to have another appointment to get the treatment. And the VA is very, I don't know what I want, very late in payment, to the point that several of the dentists and doctors in the area refuse to do community care,
Right.
which is backlogging the VA down in Syracuse. And I mean, what can we do to correct that?
Yeah.
Get rid of the VA, it doesn't need to be there.
Well, I
It
think
should
that-
be just,
Or resource it
We have the
appropriately.
largest
Well, it
veteran
should be.
community in all of New York State in this area.
right, the
Absolutely.
veterans should be able to just go to a doctor.
Yeah.
Or go for whatever they need
I
with a
think-
card.
I think there's certainly a lot of work that can be done around cutting through the bureaucracy, because the VA, for all of its benefits or whatever, is a big bureaucracy. It's one of the largest in our government. And we need to make sure that we don't create additional burdens and hurdles for our veterans to get care. I know that there have been some positive things around choice and access to certain things, but it's only so good as actually having somebody that's gonna
I mean, I
accept.
have a friend who was in the middle of dental care,
Yeah,
and his care was stopped because the VA was not paying the dentist.
yeah,
He's in the middle of it, it
Right.
stopped.
yeah.
Actually, the VA contracts, I don't work for the VA, I work for the Army. The VA actually contract with the contractor. So some of the challenges actually are involved with the contractor and some of the rules, not directly with the VA. And the VA ultimately owns it, but it's a contractor issue.
And the contractor is a private health insurance company?
It's
or-
a company that, I forget who the exact name is, but it's a company that contracts with other providers, and then they credit and credential them. And then the VA, community care puts a referral directly out to the contractor, and then the contractor has so many providers in the area. The challenge is that It's just simply, and again, forgive me, it's simply not the VA, it's TRICARE. TRICARE is the lowest paid provider. So a lot of people, maybe not here in the North Country, but if you go to Boston or New York or wherever, they're not taking TRICARE.
They're not here either. Not TRICARE Prime, they'll take TRICARE for life, but a lot of them have, because Humana is so late in paying them.
And that's a problem, with the DHA, that organization. And I think the DHA's committed for the North Country to put more people out in the economy to get health care, which actually compromises people who live in the community. It's a dilemma, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Right,
So you get no benefit.
right.
Well, a common thread with that is the push that we've had so-called leaders that their thing is, why should we provide a government service if we can't profit off it? Well, the vets, our soldiers didn't say, what's in it for me? Before they signed up. I know your husband didn't.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is what we should have members of Congress focusing on, right? Going to help unclog the bureaucracy, break down and cut through the red tape, creating streamline, actually identifying where are the pain points, why are providers, the few that we have in our community, not taking the kind of insurance that we need. How can we make sure that they're reimbursed and can do so on a streamlined basis and not having to wait for things? And how can we make sure that those folks, particularly those who have served our country, have a presumption of entitlement for their benefits, and they don't have to fight with the system to justify getting the services that they're requesting, because that's a key challenge I hear over and over and over. Build that into the system, and then create a streamlined sort of payment flow from the aftermath of that. But some of this is also a reflection of how broken our healthcare system is overall, and there needs to be some fixes there as well.
Matt, I have a question about cannabis or marijuana.
Sure.
I don't know if somebody asked that question.
Nope.
What is your position about marijuana, and why has Congress been delayed in approving, unscheduling marijuana, whereas states have, like New York have approved it? And then I think the third question is, you're a congressman. What's your leadership role? What are you able to do really to talk about this topic, which I think a lot of people here in the North Country find marijuana as something that they use for medical and for other purposes?
Not a congressman yet, let's assume, yes, for all intents and purposes. So we may have seen the news very recently last week where the president has pardoned a whole bunch of just possession of marijuana and is going down a path, I think, of decriminalization at the federal level, the scheduling and sort of reducing it there. I think that that's something that's appropriate. I think that we have an unfortunate sort of history in which people had faced incarceration for low-level possession of marijuana, and that we should decriminalize. I think that there is a distinction and difference between decriminalization and legalization. And I think my perspective is, from a state perspective, allow states to determine whether to move forward with legalization or not. I know here in New York that there has been an initiative and movement to allow, even at a greater local level, a determination about whether you're going to have the sale and appropriateness, and it's determined, and I think that that's wholly appropriate. But I think from a federal perspective, the decriminalization is appropriate, and that's where we would go in that regard.
What do you support? What do you think?
That decriminalization, and leave it up to the states in terms of legalization.
What about decriminalization of other drugs? There's a movement, a lot of people think that, like the Portugal model, where you decriminalize all drugs, that will actually, at long-term, reduce people's usage and stigma about getting treatment.
I'm not quite sure I'd go that far. I think you'd have to look at certain things on a case-by-case basis, particularly marijuana. I think we have at least now with the reducing the scheduling, you'd have an opportunity to truly study the health effects and maybe even the bad health effects, because certain substances, just because they're decriminalized or maybe legalized, doesn't mean they're good for you. We saw that with cigarettes. We've seen it certainly with alcohol; they can be abused. And so I think that, listen, I've seen friends who have died of opioid overdoses, and we're doing so sort of quietly. My godfather, who's my uncle, was a heroin addict and died with a needle in his arm. So I think that there are certain things that we wanna make sure we're putting folks in a position to get the kind of help they need and avoid the use of that. But I'm not sure that completely going down a path for certain substances of decriminalization is necessarily the right answer. I wanna make sure that our mental health, substance abuse professionals have the ability and resources to address the driver, the demand aspect of this. But there are folks who are abusing the system, and it's not just because they're illegal substances and are actually perpetuating criminal activity. We wanna make sure our law enforcement have the resources to break that sort of down. And so that's sort of where I'd stand, but I have to sort of examine any other sort of scheduled, narcotic or whatever it may be. But on the marijuana issue, I think the decriminalization makes sense at the federal level. That hand is, I have one more question from the group, and then.
You don't get to ask questions.
We've done this like a number of times. From the group, and then if you'd like to ask me a question in private, I'll stick around for another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, as a trustee here in the village, I helped the superintendent work with streets and infrastructure. Increased traffic flow has been a big issue through the village, mainly because of what's next door, okay? We have been unable to get any extra funding to help repair and maintain what we have. We've worked off our CHIPS money and tax money. Are we maintaining? Yeah, but it's not gonna get any better. Okay, as prices go up, the problems we mentioned in the area, unaffordable housing, et cetera, lack of private sector business. Now we're faced with a large infrastructure issue with a new sewer plant, which we're trying to get some grants and get that going. State mandated, mind you, okay? We've looked at grants for streets, and it went down a dead end street every time. In fact, we met with a grant writer a week ago, and nothing available. What can be done to get some impact money, whatever you wanna call it, for a little village? I shouldn't say just a village, and it encompasses town and whatever, but our main objective is village.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can I ask if you've reached out to your current congressional representative in Elise Stefanik's office for
No.
assistance? Okay.
No.
That may be a starting
I
point.
can't honestly say that.
It may be a starting point, because I know that there's federal infrastructure investment dollars, the bipartisan infrastructure package and bill that was passed last year, creates an opportunity to address these very same issues. Our infrastructure in this nation, particularly roads and bridges, basic expectations for government, right? Just fix our roads and bridges. Non-controversial. That has long gone unaddressed, and we have crumbling roads and bridges across this nation as a result of that. So there was many dollars put forward in an opportunity to bring us back up to current day expectation. We haven't even started to address what the future needs, but at least repairing what we have right now to bring us up to current code expectations to have passable roads and bridges. So that bill is out there. There are funding sources for that at the federal level that could be available to you. One of the concerns that I'll flag for you is that Congresswoman Stefanik voted against that bill. It was a bipartisan bill passed with pretty significant bipartisan numbers to include, here in New York, members of the Republican congressional delegation. You may have seen Lee Zeldin's running for governor. He voted for that bill. Elise Stefanik way out of step, even with her own party, on that particular issue. It's unfortunate. Ironically, I've made this point before, I talk about the far left and the far right. The only members, I think, of the New York congressional delegation that voted against the bipartisan infrastructure were Elise Stefanik and AOC. We'll leave that sort of commentary for later. But there are federal dollars, and your federal representative should be in a position to help navigate the federal bureaucracy to try to bring some dollars to this local level for those. And so constituent services is a key area that you should expect out of your congressional representative to help you navigate the federal bureaucracy, to go find those grant opportunities, those sources of funding, to help deliver those here at a local level. Some of those dollars will be coming to New York State, and the state will then be distributing them. It would be nice to have a federal representative and have at least an opportunity to work in a collaborative fashion with state legislators and the governor to help make sure that those federal dollars are delivered here to our community. I'm not sure we quite have that right now in Congresswoman Stefanik. In fact, I'd argue that we don't. We have an antagonistic relationship. Correct. So maybe the first step might be voting in November, in less than 4 weeks, to help have some turnover and change there. You may not be in a position to wait until then, so contact her congressional office and see what can be done.
See if she responds to begin with.
Right. We've certainly seen and she's done this time and time again, I'll draw your attention to this, where she's claimed results for delivering infrastructure projects and infrastructure money and support for veterans, but in reality, actually voted against it in Washington, D.C. This is something we actually put out on our website this past week or two called the Stefanik Scam, in which she's claimed credit or results for something that she actually voted against in Washington, D.C. It's important for all of us in this election to keep informing our fellow voters, the electorate, of her real record, which is only 2 bills in 8 years that she's passing the law. A commemorative coin and the renaming of a post office. That's it. So for the hundreds of thousands of dollars we paid her in a salary to go do our work for us in Washington, D.C., she's done quite well for herself, hasn't really done well for us. But there are federal dollars that can and should be delivered here, and that's something that, as a member of Congress, I would help you out with.
Good. Yeah, her main interest obviously is focused on her financial contributors, if you look and see who they are, which are defense contractors. So she gives 3 good, what about?
Yeah. And I think you highlight another issue in terms of the surrounding area for the community that surrounds Fort Drum. Now, Watertown is no longer in the district, in this district, but Fort Drum itself is, and the northern portions of Jefferson County are. And how do we make sure that the investments where even members of our service members who are stationed have access to roads that can be traversable, have access to healthcare that they can get in touch with, have access, if they have a family, to childcare resources. Those investments need to be made in the community that surrounds Fort Drum, and they're not being done right now because our current federal representative may only really be interested in supporting the defense contractors and those dollars that are going towards those projects, and not the projects in the communities where our service members and certainly our veterans live in this community. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all. We do have less than 4 weeks until Election Day. I hope to earn your vote in that election, and if you have the opportunity to get involved in this race, you can volunteer on our website. We're doing phone calls, door knocking, spreading the word.
Any posters?
I'm not sure, we do have some posters.
I have signed.
Okay.
You just, thank you.
And I'll stick around for another 10 or so minutes if anybody has any questions or wants to chat.